My name is Paula Vogel, and this is my life in the theater. All right, let's see what we've gotten here. And Baby Makes Seven. I call this play my Scottish play. It's the play whose name you should not say in a rehearsal hall so that you don't bring down the bad luck. I loved the play. I had a great time doing this play. And for some reason, because I thought it was a funny little comedy, it kind of horrified a lot of artistic directors, literary managers. There was a producer by the name of Dorothy Olam who said, "I wouldn't pay $40 to see In Baby Makes Seven. I wouldn't pay $20 to see In Baby Makes Seven. I wouldn't go see it for free." So for some reason, and it probably has to do with writing a comedy that is a queer comedy in the 1980s, it didn't quite meet its audiences. I'm always thrilled when I hear that young actors, young directors are doing this. However, it was an astonishing experience for me working with Circle Repertory. Circle Repertory gave me the first professional production of this play, and there's a remarkable woman I need to tell you about. Her name is Tanya Berezin, and we just lost her recently. She was the artistic director of Circle Rep, and she opened the door for me. Literally, I'm now finding out as a result of her obituary how many doors she opened for so many people in the theater. She had produced Desdemona as the first show of mine at Circle Rep, and I loved that production. I'll talk about that later. But let's just say Mel Gusso didn't appreciate the play. And as we were closing Desdemona, one day she showed up at the theater, took my hand and said, "Come with me." And she walked me out of Circle Rep. We crossed over Sheridan Square. We walked to Christopher Street, and she led me up Christopher Street to the Lucille Lortel Theater. And there on the marquee was And Baby Makes Seven by Paula Vogel. That was her surprise. She was determined that, okay, one bad New York Times review, let's do another. So I have such a debt of gratitude, as well as to these actors who I thought were astonishing in this play. Cherry Jones, Peter Frechette, and Mary Mara. So, you know, everyone's got to have one Scottish play. And this is mine, and I think it's always a mistake if I go and see it, but I hear it does very well if I'm not in the theater. And Baby Makes Seven, and it really is a comedy, I think. Okay, next. Actually, this was my first play at Circle Rep, The Baltimore Waltz. I wrote The Baltimore Waltz a year after my brother died, and I had been his caretaker while he was dying of AIDS. And I just thought I can never write again. I was in such deep grief. But I was on a tenure track at Brown University, and a friend in the English department came to me and said, "We really want to keep you here, but the last play you wrote was In Baby Makes Seven. You've got to write a new play." So I went to this beautiful place called the McDowell Colony, and I was starting on another play called Hot and Throbbing. But they put me in this cottage where Thornton Wilder had written Our Town, and I saw his name on the wall, and I went, oh, to hell with it. I locked the door of my cottage. I didn't come out for 3 weeks, and when I came out, I had the script of the Baltimore Waltz in hand. I had just met the extraordinary Anne Bogart, who had been fired by Trinity Rep. But she was also the first artistic director in my hometown to ask me about my plays. So she was in New York, back in New York, and Tanya Berezin was presented with the play by the literary manager, and Tanya said, "Am I going to understand this play?" And the literary manager said, "No, She said, should we do a reading or should we do a workshop? And God bless this woman, Adrian, said, do a workshop. So I asked Tanya, I said, look, can I work with Anne Bogart? I've always wanted to. And we did a workshop at Circle Rep. Anne directed it in her living room. She had a big studio apartment. She took all the furniture out and she staged it in this big studio apartment, and we did the workshop. And I was terrified to go to the legendary Circle Rep, and in walked Lanford Wilson in the row behind me. He was pressing his knees against me. And as they were announcing the cast and my name and Anne Bogart, the lab was cheering for us. And Lanford Wilson went, who the hell is this Paula Vogel? Look at this, I don't know who this girl is. And people are applauding for her? What the f is this? And I'm like shrinking down in my seat. And then we did Baltimore Waltz. And I felt Lanford Wilson's knees shaking because he was weeping so hard. And I turned around and said to him, Mr. Wilson, I have always loved your work. It's an honor to be in your theater. I'm Paula Vogel. And that's when we went for our first drink together. A magical, unbelievable experience. I describe it this way still to this day. Baltimore Waltz, I would have been happy to have walked out of the theater and be killed by a bus. And as I died, I would think, Daenu, this was enough. I loved every intern working on it, that incredible cast, Richard Thompson, Joe Mantello, and Sherry Jones, and the extraordinary Anne Bogart. So that's Baltimore Waltz. That was my breakthrough play. And I don't see it anymore, but I always love that when people tell me they're doing the play, I always ask them to say hello to my brother, because I always think he's in the theater watching. All right, so Desdemona. I first wrote Desdemona in graduate school. It was the second play that I wrote at Cornell University. And it's a three-character play. All the women in Othello, it's just basically them. And for some reason, like in Baby Makes Seven, this was a play that really irritated a lot of older folks in the theater. I would do readings, and the guys would say, okay, so when does Othello come in? I'm like, well, he doesn't show up. Well, if you could put Othello in, I'm like, no, it's about the women. And over and over and over again. It also kind of shocked my graduate committee, which I'm really quite delighted about. I did, over the years, about 3 major rewrites of this play. And again, who's the one who picked it up? Tanya Barrison. Tanya Barrison was like, I want to do this play. We're doing this play at Circle Rep. And again, an extraordinary cast. We had J. Smith Cameron as Desdemona. We had Sherry Jones as Bianca. And we had Fran Brill as Amelia, directed by, and it was a gorgeous production, Gloria Muzzio. Now, when you stop and you think about this in the 80s, how many artistic directors are embracing all-women teams? Tanya Barrison. It didn't succeed, but it succeeded for me. There wasn't a thing that I would change in it. And I'm really happy. It's done a lot. You know, I'm glad to put the sex scenes back in Desdemona. And about Desdemona, I wrote it in 1976, but it was done at Circle Rep in 1993. And actually, the next play also is part of my Circle Rep chapter. I wrote this play called Hot and Throbbing. And there are a number of reasons that I wrote it. One of the reasons I wrote it was Jesse Helms had passed this law about the National Endowment for the Arts, saying that no NEA will be given to any artwork that offends community values. This was at the time of the Piss Christ and my dear friend Holly Hughes and all of this amazing performance art. And so I thought, what can I write that offends community values? So I sat down to write Hot and Throbbing, which also at the time, there was a Canadian feminist theorist who wanted to outlaw pornography. Now this may sound strange to say, but there's pornography and then there's pornography. I think pornography is swell as long as we're not talking about snuff films and we're not talking about an imbalance of power. In fact, one of the very first women playwrights, I'm not going to say her name, that I ever met in my early 20s was a playwright in Washington, D.C. And I said to her, so how do you make a living? And she said, I write soft pornography for a women's pornographic film company. And I went, oh my God, that sounds fantastic. She said, yeah, they call me up and they say, okay, this month we're doing nuns. We want erotica about nuns. Okay, now we're gonna do something at the racetracks, you know? And I'm like, holy crap. I said, how long does it take you to finish a script or finish a book? And she'd say, I just tear them out in a month. I thought that was so inspiring that when a friend of mine had her 30th birthday back at Cornell, all of us who were friends with this woman sat down and wrote a pornographic novel for her, and each of us did a different chapter. I got the High School Academy, which was really, I thought, fun and hot. So, Hot and Throbbing, I thought, you know, there is such a thing as feminist pornography companies, and that became the protagonist, Charlene. But the truth of the matter is, again, I wanted to juxtapose pornography with what is really obscene. And what is really obscene is domestic violence. And that we continue to ignore domestic violence. Sadly, we continue to ignore it now as much as we did. We're still asking the same questions. Why didn't she leave him? Et cetera and so forth. So I sat down, I wrote Hot and Throbbing, and when I handed it to my agent of the time, the lovely Peter Franklin, he read it and he said, wow, very brave work. You're going to get maybe 2 productions, and that's it. So he was actually right. It really kind of amazed me. The first production was at American Repertory Theater, directed by Anne Bogart, and we did it in a very quick time frame of 3 weeks. It was very important, Hot and Throbbing, for a number of reasons. I didn't have control of the play world. I knew it. It was bold. It was ambitious. I loved some of the writing in this, but I didn't know how to deal with domestic violence without being violent towards the audience. This is hearsay, but apparently there was a judge, a very well-respected judge in Cambridge who came to see the play. And it so upset him that he went home and stayed in his house for a week. He'd never told anyone that he had experienced as a boy domestic violence and had witnessed this. So I didn't really try to produce this a lot. I went back, I tried to rewrite it so that it would not be abusive. The second, I didn't really ever get this one to work. The second major production was at Arena Stage. But I don't think I would have written this little play about driving had I not written Hot and Throbbing to learn that firsthand. Because you have to be aware when you're writing something, who's in the audience? Whose life story are you telling? Not only your own. How do you give them the grace and the privacy and the respect so they can process their own experience in a play? And that's Hot and Throbbing. Very wonderful, brave actors who did this production all the way through. So, Hot and Throbbing. And now, Mineola Twins, my one comedy, my one sheer comedy. I wrote Mineola Twins as the curtain raiser for this little play called How I Learned to Drive. I'd gotten this grant, the Pew Charitable Trust grant. I've been writing all of these plays while I was working 80 hours a week at Brown University. Job of my lifetime, running a playwriting program, in, finding and enlisting playwrights to apply and come to me, and then basically producing everything they wrote. Nilo Cruz, come to Brown, write everything you can. We only have $100 budgets, but we'll throw it up live. I mean, I loved my job. So where did I find time to write? Only in the summer. And then, lo and behold, TCG, God bless them, gave me the Pew Charitable Trust. I could actually take a semester off and go to Alaska and Perseverance Theater and write 2 plays. So I decided the first play would be the same time frame about women in America from 1950 to the present time, which back then was the 1990s. And I had been thinking about, the Greeks. When you wrote something like Antigone, you had to sit and write a comedy in the same subject matter. Every Greek playwright, we only have a handful of their tragedies, but think about this. They were also writing Borscht Belt takeoffs of the same themes that were then presented in the festival. And I thought, damn it, the Greeks can do this. Get off your ass, Vogel. Try and write a comedy. So I wrote Mineola Twins that followed identical twin sisters living in Mineola, Long Island. Only there's some fluke of genetics. One twin is loaded, and one twin is, as they say in the play, flat as a pancake. But because of this, I was looking at all of the twin fables of this kind of war that occurs starting in the womb, that they become polar opposites. One twin wants to be a good homemaker in the 1950s, and one twin is a hellion who is in a leather jacket and has watched Rebel Without a Cause one too many times, and embraces promiscuity in this small town of Mineola, Long Island. And it was just to be fun and a lark, and it kind of builds on the Jacob and Esau, and it went all the way to the present time when the twin, who's flat as a pancake, ends up as the head of Planned Parenthood, and her sister is going to bomb the clinic. Amazingly, we got Swoosie Kurtz to play the identical twins. Joe Mantello directed it. It was done at the Roundabout. We had Julie Kavner that we know was very shocking to me. I had to recalibrate. Was the critic John Simon liked it, who had skewered every play I'd ever written, and who once remarked that Paula Vogel got more awards than a black sofa collects lint. So Mineola Twins, the first production was at Perseverance Theater. The audience there loved it. Incredible local cast. On opening night, I just remember everybody standing up and singing Happy Birthday. And again, it was one of those experiences where I can die happy right now. Okay, so that's Mineola Twins. But it was produced after How I Learned to Drive. It was written before. So How I Learned to Drive happened in the following way. I owed a second play to the Pew Charitable Trust. And I had done all this research. I wanted to write a play about castrati. There was a castrato. They've made movies about him. His name was Farinelli. And apparently, people say he had the most magnificent voice of anyone ever born. So castrati, as you may know, the church would find orphaned boys or buy them from poor parents, and then they'd castrate them before they came of age and puberty so that they retained a high soprano voice. And what would happen is that because of the castration, they had enormous bone growth. So we had these men walking around who looked like basketball players in the 17th and 18th century with big barreled chests. So it was as if they had a microphone in their chest. And they were basically stars of the opera. And this Farinelli was so adored that they literally stopped wars in Europe to pass him to kings. He would travel and sing for kings. People would faint when he was singing. But the extraordinary thing about him is he was an exceptionally good man. He was brought by the Queen of Spain. The Queen of Spain begged him to sing for her husband, who had gone into a depression and refused to leave his bedroom, refused to bathe or shave. And she said, please, please come to the castle, sing in the next room. And when the king finally leaves his bedroom to see who is singing this gorgeous sound, if he asks you to sing again, you must say, sire, you must bathe and shave yourself. And that's what happened. He said, sire, you must bathe and shave yourself. The king wouldn't let Farinelli go. He couldn't bear it. So he made Farinelli a kind of prime minister of Spain. And Farinelli spent 10 years in the Kingdom of Spain, basically doing the first welfare, building roads, taking care of the population, because he himself had been a boy born in poverty. I was going to do all of this for Cherry Jones, and I was going to look for 4 children with soprano voices. And there was a moment in time that Farinelli's voice, after his big opening in Venice, his voice started to fail, which sometimes happened. So they put him on vocal rest, and he went back to the conservatory where he was trained. And that's where this play was going to start. It was going to start with a monologue where Farinelli said, it did not hurt when the knife descended. But how he, as a master teacher, teaching this class of boys before they are selected for castration, realizes what the price of art is. And he refuses to have this spectacular singer, this boy, castrated, and says, sing in your own voice, which is basically a life of poverty. Spent 3 years of research on it. Week before we were supposed to go on the plane, Cherry Jones calls me and said, I feel terrible, I don't know what to do. I said, what, Cherry? She said, I just got offered my first Broadway role. I said, Cherry, you gotta take it. She said, I can't come with you to Alaska. I said, that's okay, you have to do what you have to do. She was cast in The Heiress, and it became her breakthrough. She was magnificent in it. So I didn't have time to tell the company. I just hopped on the plane, and I arrived at Juneau Airport, and the whole company comes out to meet me, and they're like, where's Cherry? I said, funny thing about that. Cherry couldn't make it, but not to worry. I have this other play. And on the plane ride, I just manufactured this play that had been in my head for 15 years. I said, let's see if we can get permission to do it. And I described the play as Lolita from Lolita's point of view. And I knew that there were members of the company who could play Peck and Little Bit beautifully. And so I sat down in Juneau, Alaska, where in the summertime there really is no darkness. And I wrote at least 20 hours out of every 24. I only took naps. And in 2 weeks, I came out with How I Learned to Drive. We did the first reading in Alaska, and it was terrifying because when the play was over, there was this sound of silence in the room. And I thought, oh my God, they're gonna stone me. And I didn't realize it was because they couldn't speak. So what happened was I gave the play to several theaters in New York, all of whom read it, and I wanted to work on it further. And I got calls from very lovely people who went, oh dear, you don't really know who these people are. How can we help you? I think you have to start from the very beginning. Let's give you a workshop where you can just tear up all of your pages. But I had already heard it with actors. And so I would just say, no, thank you, just send the script back. And I I called my agent and I started to cry and I said, what am I doing crying? This is nothing, this is nothing. And he said, hold on. I'm going to send this manuscript to Doug Abel, whom I'd heard of, who's artistic director of the Vineyard. I have a feeling that he'll get it. 24 hours later, I was called by Doug Abel, who said, Paula Vogel, we don't know each other, but I want to tell you right now, I want to do this play. I said, what? He said, I don't want you to think that we're auditioning you. I want to do this play. It's ready to be done right now. I said, you're joking. He said, we want to have a reading for reasons of casting. I went, I'm in your hands. And I said, what are you thinking? He said, at this point, it was November. He said, well, I think we go into rehearsal in January. I said, January? I said, my gosh, I haven't even showed the play to my family or my friends. He said, yeah, I think January. And I have this feeling about these two actors, Mary Louise Parker and David Morse. And I said, but who's going to be the director? And he said, I want you to have a talk with Mark Brokaw. A day later, I called Mark Brokaw. You know the sensation you get when you're falling in love in high school and you're still shy, but you can't get off the phone? You're hungry to stay on the phone. Something about Mark's voice and the way he talked about the play, I saw this vivid life. And I just went, I'm in. This is remarkable. And there became, Baltimore Waltz, there are a couple of blessings I've had. Certainly Baltimore Waltz and Bogart. But oh my God, Mark Brokaw and How I Learned to Drive in this tiny theater. Actually, they were both in tiny theaters of about 100 seats. I did not know what to expect. I certainly didn't expect what happened with How I Learned to Drive. Vineyard kept it running with 4 magnificent casts for over a year. It ended up winning the Pulitzer, the New York Dramas. Mark, the actors, all of us were just celebrating each other. Although I gotta say, the best thing about, not the best, but one of the fun things about How I Learned to Drive is there's a scene in the play where the uncle who is seducing his niece brings out expensive champagne for her, and there's a champagne scene. Well, unbeknownst to us, one night, the woman who's the CEO of Veuve Clicquot came to see the show. And the very next night, there was a magnum of her highest champagne, La Grande Dame. And as soon as the show was over, we popped that baby, all of us, everybody on the crew, we were just passing the bottle of La Grande Dame around backstage. Anyway, there's something to be said for product placement. That's all I need to say. All right, this next play, I want to say that the most important thing to me in my lifetime is the process of putting on a play and not the end result. The most important thing to me about being a theater artist is getting the incredible opportunity and luxury to be in the room with artists and watch them work. I would pay people, and actually have, to do this job. So The Long Christmas Ride Home was something that I'd been thinking about writing as an homage to Thornton Wilder's 3 one-acts, which I absolutely loved. I loved the way he incorporated Japanese dramaturgy into his plays, Happy Journey and Long Christmas Dinner. And I thought, I'm going to sit down to Thornton and do an homage to Thornton Wilder because I love him and he's important. And I'm going to, now that it's been over 15 years since my brother died, now that I have a little more distance, I want to look at my brother Carl, I want to look at the family, I want to look at how do we get over this trauma. And so I I hadn't read his plays, his one-acts, since high school. I went to the library, I took them out, I started to sit down at my writing desk, I opened up Long Christmas Dinner and my phone rings. And I pick it up and it's a strange man's voice. And he said, "Is this Paula Vogel?" And I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "You don't know me. My name is Tappan Wilder and I'm Thornton Wilder's executor and nephew." I said, "Mr. Wilder, I've just opened up the Long Christmas Dinner because I wanted to write an homage to your uncle's short plays, and you're wigging me out." And he said, "Well, people have noted that there's a similarity in your work." I said, "I'm very influenced by your uncle." So I thought that was a good sign. And I gladly did an introduction to Skin of Our Teeth. I wrote Long Christmas Ride Home as thoughtfully as I can, which isn't perhaps very as a Westerner, to write a kind of bunraku hybrid play. And I did this knowing that it's very delicate to use other cultures as a Westerner. But I did it as well because my brother loved studying Japanese, studying the tea ceremony, studying zeami, studying all things Japanese. This was his great love. And I thought, well, I have no right, I don't know what I'm doing. And I wrote a puppet show called The Long Christmas Ride Home. Extremely autobiographical. Now, I'm going to shoot forward to the good news. I ended up on the doorstep of Doug Abel in the Vineyard late in August, before my signature contract started, when I couldn't produce any other plays in New York, crying on the phone saying, "I'll never finish this play." And he said, "Send it to me, I'll read it." And again, he called me back in the day, and he said, in the day, he called me back and he said, "Okay, I want to do your play. It's August. The only time we can do it is in September." And I just gave everybody a summer vacation. So I need to call the staff together and find out if they'd be willing. I'm going to cry the generosity of these artists at the Vineyard Theater, if they'd be willing to cancel their summer vacation. And I said, "Can we give the script to Mark Brokaw to see if he can do it?" And this is an incredibly complicated play. We needed someone who could do bunraku puppets. We needed a choreographer. We needed a scenic designer. I mean, in 3 weeks, how impossible is it to produce this play? What was produced was beautiful. But the fact that Brokaw took this on with these actors, with this company, who in 3 weeks went all the way out there. These are the stories that critics never know, that you can never ever tell. But I do want to say that somewhere, I feel my brother got the message of the production that the Vineyard had. I know it was well received by the audience. I just owe these artists so much for redeeming my love for this play, but for the theatrical process. And that's why the Vineyard is my home in New York. This is a little bit of the Rhode Island chapter. Actually, it started at Arena Stage when Molly Smith, whom I'd been working with at Perseverance Theater in Alaska, got the job at Arena. And, you know, anyone who lives in Washington, D.C. is basically a Civil War buff. We're all experts. I can tell you the line that the actor on stage was saying. "Well, you sockdologizing old man trap." They got a huge laugh from the audience so that Booth could pull the trigger when he shot Lincoln dead. It's that kind of town. Trust me, it really is. So I went on my usual, why are we doing a Christmas Carol every year? Why are we actually talking about good capitalism at Christmas time and hailing Victorian poverty in London. What the hell is this? And there was a tablecloth made of paper. And I went, here's what we do. We do it all with the music, all of the Christmas carols, and we tell the story. We tell 4 or 5 vignettes that we thread together. So, you know, I started talking about, they were called the U.S. colored troops back then, the black soldiers, some of whom won Medal of Honors against incredible odds in the 1860s when they were allowed to join the Union. I quickly drafted the songs and the characters. It was kind of extraordinary. And then I took 10 years of reading to do the research. But I love Washington, D.C. I was born there. I feel like I knew every cobblestone. Well, I decided not to do it at Arena. We won't go into those reasons, but I kept working on it. And so the first production of Civil War Christmas was done at Long Wharf. Overwritten, needs a lot of trims, and basically at that point I was now running the Yale playwriting program. Who had the time to ever do any work on it? Still in all, Long Wharf did it. We had an amazing cast. The music was extraordinary, and thank you God I got to work with Tina Landau. I hope everyone that I love gets to work with Tina Landau. Her choreography, her positivity, the way that she makes the room entirely collaborative. I got to work with Daryl Waters, who came down and wrote, it was an entire through score, and wrote and composed the music to it. I mean, I loved the show. It is too long, but I thought, you know, I wanted to write as Aunt Paula for once. Because when kids in my family say, Aunt Paula, when can we see your plays? I'm like, when you're 21, and afterwards we go to the bar and have a stiff drink and we talk about the play. But I had all of these kids in my family who were 5 years old, who were 7 years old, who grew up in Washington, D.C. We are blessed with a multicultural, multi-religion, multi-race family. And I'm like, what can we do as a Christmas story for the Cherokee Americans in our family, for the African Americans in our family, for the Jewish members, you know, in my family? What can we do to look at this moment in time, a single Christmas Eve in 1864? And I have to say, it was thrilling to have the kids in my family able to finally come and see my work, you know, while they were still in short pants. The play is hard to do. It has been done. God bless New York Theater Workshop. Jim Nicola just called me out of the blue and said, we want to do Christmas Carol. Civil War Christmas instead of Christmas Carol. And I went, oh my God, Jim. Tina Landau directing it again in that beautiful space on 4th Street with another exquisite, incredible cast, and the music, and Daryl Waters still there. So that's about Civil War Christmas. I am now at an age where I don't know if this will happen, but it was done at Center Stage. It was a magnificent, magnificent production. It broke 50 years of their box office records. Never done again, but it was done under Kwame. Kwame was the artistic director. And I gotta tell you, the thrill for me of meeting this gentleman who brought his son, I think his son was like 10 years old. He was a direct descendant of a black Union soldier who had fought in these battles and survived. So, you know, there are thrills like that that come along. I have approached an artistic director and said, I'm now feeling that I didn't get it right. It's overwritten, and the truth of the matter is, it's not all of my legacy. I'm a white woman. I am a white aunt, and I wrote something for the kids in my family. But the truth of the matter is, I'd like this to be a conversation. So what I've proposed is a new production. I just hand the script over to an African-American playwright, and there's one that I very much love. I'm not going to name her, but she's willing to do it. Why should I, if I get to be lucky again with this, why should I wait to be dead for 100 years before someone adapts the play and it becomes Christmas Carol? Why not just say, I love your writing. Where do you want to go? How do you want to tell these stories? Please tell me your stories. And we'll see. I'm hoping by 2025. Plays are never over. Okay. Don Juan comes home from Iraq. This is one of my most terrifying experiences. There's a wonderful theater company in Philadelphia called the Wilma Theater. And there's an extraordinary director, she was artistic director at that point, Blanka Ziska, who emigrated from Czechoslovakia. And they had been thinking of doing Civil War Christmas, but we started talking, and I said, why don't we create something from scratch for your company? She was very involved with actor development. And she said, like what? And I said, well, I've always wanted to write. I do these things called bake-offs. And what they are is I hand writers, or I did this in prison a lot with women in maximum security. I'd say, read the following play about Leda and the Swan, or look at the following pictures about Leda and the Swan, and now, 48 hours from now, come in with whatever you can write in 48 hours, with a swan, a young woman, a gust of wind, and a window that the swan may smash into. See in 48 hours. So I've been doing this with Don Juan. I also work with veterans. I love working with veterans. Their stories are astonishing. Why are we not paying more attention to veterans? Why are they out of sight? Just remarkable community. So I started a Don Juan bake-off, and that includes, you must have a master, a servant, a ghost, a statue, swordplay, and a moment of coitus interruptus. See everybody in 48 hours. And I got to tell you, the Don Juan bake-offs that I've gotten have been remarkable. So I said, let's do a Don Juan play. Don Juan comes home from Iraq. The next year, we found a grant, and I spent over a year talking and interviewing 100 soldiers, 100 veterans, about their experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I got money to run a workshop in Philadelphia with 8 veteran playwrights that ran all year. We produced their work. They are remarkable and astonishing. Blanka announced the play for the spring, and I hadn't written it yet, and it's September. And we have the company, and we're doing exercises, and I managed to get half of the play out by December, you know, writing at 2 a.m. and just like not being able to hold food down. I was so terrified. I said to Blanka, can we say that we're producing a workshop? This isn't a production. The script is way overwritten. You know, her directing was brilliant. The company was brilliant. It was brilliant. And then Mr. Isherwood decided to come down and review it. We'd gotten great local local reviews, but he basically killed it. And that was the end of that play. I had wanted a different ending anyway. I've picked it up. Now I'm calling it Cressida on Top. I've talked to the Huntington about spending a year in the future with, it's about female veterans, with female veterans and one Don Juan. You can imagine what happens. And I'm hoping that I can work with the Boston community. It's set in Philadelphia. And we'll see. Am I able to do like one of the major rewrites of my life and put this one aside? But I have to say, man, the actors were so physically brave. The veterans took us in, and they were our dramaturgs. These people who are wrestling with their own trauma of being on the battlefield as women who are combat nurses, teaching the company how to lift up bodies, being absolutely transparent. And I'm very, very happy to say at least half, if not more, of the workshop continues to be in theater and write plays. And I really, really applaud all of the initiatives that are here right now of theater companies, theater artists, working with veterans who are theater artists. I think it's incredible. I think it's gift upon gift upon gift. So that's Don Juan Comes Home from Iraq. I had just pitched a play at Yale Rep and Long Wharf as a co-pro. If anyone wants to do this play, please do. I'm trying to get someone to do it. I became fascinated by something called the portrait photos. In the late 1960s, some intern who was working at the Smithsonian stubbed his toe on these dusty boxes sitting in the basement of the Smithsonian and said, "What the heck is this?" and opened up the box. And there was a naked photo of the First Lady, Barbara Bush, staring at him. He went through the box, and it was all naked undergraduates. So you know who's in those boxes, who went to women's colleges. Turns out that there were two scientists who worked at Columbia University and Harvard who convinced every Ivy League, Harvard, Princeton, Brown University, and every woman's college, all of the Seven Sisters, to participate in a scientific experiment starting in the 1930s that anyone who became an undergraduate could not graduate unless they took a completely naked photo. And they said, we want to study the portraiture. We want to study the bone structure of the human body. And it has to be, everyone has to participate. And so a lot of colleges basically said, you can't graduate from Bryn Mawr unless you take they called it a posture photo. Turned out the two guys, right, are eugenicists. They developed a theory called somatotypes. And they wanted to prove the aristocratic leadership was possessed by white Anglo-Saxon Protestant undergraduates. That didn't come out until the 1960s. They did publish their work on the boys. I actually got a copy and looked at it. And they basically blank out the face, and they have a little kind of photographic fig leaf. But I became fascinated by this. And I said to James Bundy, and I said to Gordon Edelstein, I want to do this in 2 acts. Act 1 will be the women's college, Act 2 will be the men's college. When we go out of Yale Rep, at intermission there'll be school buses to take us to Long Wharf. And I was interested in who said no. In all of these classes, did anyone say no? Did anyone smell what the agenda was of these apparently objective scientific studies? Look, when we write plays, we write valentines, we write love letters, but we also write for revenge. There are a lot of names in my plays of the boys and girls in 2nd grade who bullied me. And if I need a name for a character, I'll find their name. At any rate, in the middle of this research, the phone rang. It was Bill Rauch. It was Rebecca Teichman. And Rebecca said, do you know about this play, God of Vengeance? And I said, know it. I read it when I was 23 years old in grad school. I did an entire study course on Yiddish theater, an independent study course on Yiddish theater. Of course I do. And I had been long interested in doing a play about censorship. For a while I was thinking, maybe I'll write a play about Mae West. Maybe I'll write a play about The Well of Loneliness. And Rebecca said, I did this as a graduate thesis. I staged the obscenity trial that happened in 1923 when this play that was written in 1906 in Yiddish traveled all through Europe. And it's a play about a brothel owner who is raising a pure Jewish daughter, and with the money from the brothel, he's bribing his way into a society marriage for his daughter. Only hitch is, the daughter falls in love with a prostitute in the basement. It was acclaimed and a critical success all through Europe, and for the immigrants on the Lower East Side in New York, in Yiddish. It was a, standing room only kind of event. Then someone got the bright idea in 1922, what if we translate Yiddish to English, and what if we bring it to Broadway? And the irony is that at the time, a very wonderful liberal rabbi was so shocked that it was in English on Broadway and that people would think that Jewish people were in the sex trade, that he brought a complaint to the vice squad. And the entire cast was arrested for obscenity. And that was kind of the end in this country of this wonderful play written in 1906. Please read The God of Vengeance. Well, as they're talking to me, I'm like, oh my God, I've got this other commission. What am I going to do about it? But as we're talking about it, I went, Bill, Rebecca, it's not about the trial. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, this only occurs every now and then, and it's how I wrote How I Learned to Drive. I'm seeing something. And I know it makes me sound I'm schizophrenic. And they said, what are you seeing? I said, I'm seeing a dusty Yiddish vaudevillian troupe that have been sitting in the dust for ages. And they start to stir, and they rise to their feet, and they brush off the dust. That's what I'm seeing. We've got to go there. Not only that, for some reason, and I'd never done research, I knew it was Poland, of course, because that's where Sholomach wrote. I knew it was Włóch or Włóch, depending on whether you're using the Yiddish or the Polish pronunciation, and I'm messing both up. And I then commenced on 10 years of reading. Many, many, many readings. I did 40 drafts of this play. I couldn't let it go. We cobbled together. Fortunately, Sundance said, yeah, come do the first draft. The magnificent Celia Keenan Bolger was in that. Rebecca Teichman directed that. And then I'd go and I'd rip it all up. And we convinced Yale rep, La Jolla, and the Vineyard to co-produce it in a single season. And why, my friends? Because the New York Times, having had Don Juan comes home from the wars killed off by a review out of town by Mr. Isherwood, the Times wouldn't send a reviewer if it was coming to New York in the same season. So I'm there with this huge thing, 10 characters, klezmer band, fully choreographed, fully, an underscore created by these two composers every night, going back home, rewriting a scene and bringing in a new song in the morning in front of a live audience. We managed to get the same troupe for all 3 productions. I have never experienced that in my lifetime. And God bless the Vineyard, again, Sarah Stern was like, whew, you want us to do this in spring? I'm like, yeah, I know it's August, but can you do it? And we're doing it at Yale Rep in 700 seats, and we're doing it in La Jolla in 500 seats. And we took it into that beautiful, beautiful theater, 125 seats. And she said, yes, we'll do it in the same season. And that gave me the ability to do the 40 drafts. I was rewriting this baby, up till Broadway. But the actors, every single member of the design team, every single person. Do you know we're still writing each other? This was produced in 2017 on Broadway. We opened it in 2015. There have been 2 children born to the company. And I always say to them, you were having fun while I was doing the rewrites. We all say we're company, we all say we're family. But to see the way that they gave love to each other, and to Sholomach, his family has seen it. Everywhere that he has a member of his extended family, his entire British family came to see it when it was in London. This has made me believe in miracles. They gave me a miracle, not just a production. And now we're up to Mother Play. So I'm very excited about Mother Play. I had it in my mind for about 20 years. And I had before based a character on my mother, Phyllis. When people met Phyllis, they'd say, boy, you got to write a play for her. She's a character, and I'd say, is it Tennessee Williams? Is it Arthur Lorenzen Gypsy, or is it Man in the Moon Marigolds? And I wrote her into How I Learned to Drive. So I'm putting these back to back. How I Learned to Drive, you've probably heard some of the story that I wrote it in 2 weeks. And then it went to the Vineyard, and then it took off all over the world. It was the first time that my mother had ever read or seen a play of mine. I left the family due to my being out for many, many years. And it happened so quickly, How I Learned to Drive, that I sent it to my mother and I said, Mom, it's November, you better read this. It's opening in New York in February. And she read the play and she said, it's beautiful. And she said, I'll be there on opening night. Please don't tell anyone it's autobiographical. I said, done. It's a play about Lolita from Lolita's point of view. My mother was the basis for the character Lucy, and she laughed louder than anybody else in the audience. And I was so happy. I had dedicated the script to her, but she died before the Pulitzer Prize came out. But we had one night together where we stayed in a hotel room, and I brought in the reviews at 3 a.m., and she held my hand, and she read every review. So, Mother play. Yes, it's autobiographical, but there's a lot of fiction in it. The main thing about Mother play, it's been in my head for a long time. We lived under the poverty line. We lived in what we now call Section 8 housing, and we lived oftentimes in the custodial apartment where it's very inexpensive. So the subtitle of the play is A Play in 5 Evictions. And so I'm looking at Phyllis, has the same name, played by the magnificent Jessica Lange. My brother Carl has the same name, played by Jim Parsons. And the character Martha, who is a combination of myself and my living brother Mark, played by the magnificent Suya Keenan-Bolger. And we are going from eviction to eviction, sub-basement to sub-basement. And you know the last scene in Our Town where Emily says, if I could only go back once to my childhood and see my mother again? I realized if I wanted to go back and see my mother again, along with the martinis and the cigarette smoking, I'd have to go back and see the roaches and the rats. So this may be the only time that you actually see a roach ballet on stage. I have no idea how the magnificent Tina Landau is going to pull this off. It is a comedy. It is also, of course, it's a family. There's pain in that family. But the most important thing, my mother finally did come around after my brother died of AIDS to make her peace with me. I kind of want to say, I'm sorry that I lost so much time with her. And I'm sorry that she lost so much of my life. And in this moment of time, when children are being picked on by governors and school boards and Republican politicians, please don't evict your children from your heart, because our lifespan is very, very short. So this is the good and the bad, my celebration of this family. And you know what? Having written it, I wrote it last December. This is its first production. We haven't had any production out of town. I'm only on maybe my 6th or 7th rewrite. But in the hands of these actors, this director, and these amazing designers, as we say in Yiddish, die, die, enu, this would be enough.